Welcome to Growth Beyond Boundaries, the podcast by the Astra Coach Alliance that explores the transformative power of coaching, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Andy Huckaba, and I'm so excited to have you join us. Here at the Astra Coach Alliance, we believe growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Whether you're a leader striving to inspire your team, a professional seeking your next breakthrough, or an organization ready to transform your culture, this podcast is for you. Each segment, we bring you stories, strategies, and insights from our team of seasoned coaches and leaders across industry. Together, we'll discover innovative approaches to fostering a culture built on success, accountability, and collaboration, rooted in both challenging and compassionate coaching practices. So if you're ready to go beyond boundaries and discover what's possible, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to Growth Beyond Boundaries. Today, we're beginning a three-part conversation about burnout. It's a topic we hear about constantly, but I wonder if we always understand what it really is. Recently, I heard burnout described as spinning your wheels, as workplace depression, and even as hitting a wall after carrying too much for too long. What struck me is that none of these descriptions started with being tired. They started with feeling stuck, disconnected, depleted, or overwhelmed. So today we'd like to explore burnout itself. What is it? What does it look like? How do people experience it? And perhaps just as importantly, what isn't burnout? So I'm joined today by two fabulous coaches, Teresa Schwab and Phyllis Collins. Welcome.
Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
So when you hear the word burnout, what comes to mind for you?
Now, I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is truly just tired or exhaustion. That would be my first thought. I'm not sure that is the definition. But my thought is just, I'm tired. I'm done.
That's what we hear from people, right?
Mm-hmm,
I'm
right.
tired. I'm done. What else comes to mind? Teresa?
It's an interesting sense or feeling, I think, about feeling like you're sort of dragging yourself somewhere you don't necessarily want to be. Like getting out of bed feels hard, getting ready feels hard. And then you just are in this process of dragging yourself to a place you don't want to be. And I think that's what burnout, I think, feels like, is just this overwhelming sense of I don't want to do it, but I have obligation. I have a mortgage payment. I have things that have to get done. And it's all on me and my responsibility. And I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want people to think I'm lazy. So I'm going to continue to just power through, even though I don't have a lot of resources. It's that sort of sense of dragging that feels like burnout.
Yeah. I had an opportunity to talk with a few people about this before our podcast today. One of them was my daughter, Andrea, who is a healthcare actuary. And she's had a few transitions with different firms over time and has experienced burnout. And she described burnout as feeling like workplace depression, highlighting that every task feels 10 times harder, disengagement from the team, company, and purpose, and a persistent emotional state rather than a temporary difficult week. So she kind of describes it in those terms. What are your reactions to those?
My reaction is it feels really hard. We spend such a huge portion of our life at work. And many of us go to work wanting to do good in the world or make a positive impact. And the idea of having to drag yourself and feeling that way every day feels really hard and isolating.
And I can even see that if you took the word work out of there and put personal or family
Right.
or other relationships, that it could all those same things could apply. Just a questioning of why am I here? And it's not just a temporary thing. Now you can't always get away from your family, which then that in there lies the challenge. But you could at different times in your life, with all of your relationships, you could experience some of those same things. This just seems hard. It just seems harder than it should be, or harder than it used to be. Or I'm just not feeling like I'm getting anything out of it, even when it comes to just personal
Yeah.
relationships or personal interactions.
You know, Phyllis, you said you can't get away from your family. What I thought you were going to say is your family can't get away from you, because that's the other thing that I'm thinking about is like if you're dragging yourself and that miserable for 8 to 10 hours a day or whatever it is that you spend at work, coming home, you've got nothing left to give to your family. So cranky, snappy, disengaged, it's also at the expense of the people around you. They can't get away from you. you know?
I'm curious about the balance between the personal, where you can feel burnout, and the workplace where you can feel burnout. One of them might cause burnout symptoms in the other, right?
Mhm.
And I wonder what your ideas or thoughts are in terms of that, because you know, oftentimes people that are burned out are people that everyone depends on, whether it's in the workplace or at home, or in some cases, both.
Well, to your point, I think my experience in my coaching practice, along with the data, which I think would support this, is the people who are most likely to burn out are the people who are the highest performers. They're
Mm.
the perfectionists, the people who want to do really good work, who are really committed, who might be overfunctioners, who might be the ones that have set themselves up in a position where a lot of people are depending on them. So it's just, I think it goes along with what we're talking about is the kind of person who is most likely to be burned out is somebody who's really wants to do a good job and a lot of people are depending on.
So we're using the word burnout a lot. Let's see if we can put some words around burnout that make sense in terms of describing it or defining it. And I want to start with that. I've done a fair amount of reading around this topic, and the one name that comes to the forefront is the person who is oftentimes cited as being the person in the 1970s psychologist who came up with the term burnout. Actually, it was at a dinner party, and she was describing this research that she was doing around these symptoms of burnout. And one of her lawyer friends said, use the word burnout. And she goes, that's it. That's the word. And she began to test that against the subjects and so forth. And it really sort of took off as the word to describe what we're talking about here. This
Well,
was
can I
Christine.
just interject and say I'm not sure that's the kind of dinner party conversation I want to have, but I mean that's a cool story, but
that's
or
that's
dinner
the way
conversation.
that's the way it at least is written.
Yeah.
Christina Maslach, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, defines the three elements of burnout. Burnout as chronic workplace stress, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and detachment, which then leads to reduced accomplishment. So the burnout is chronic workplace stress and emotional exhaustion are one. Cynicism and detachment, which I think are really interesting words, are number two. And the third one is reduced accomplishment. And so she defines it in those lights. And in some of the work, then some of burnout begins to look like exhaustion. Phyllis, you used that. Withdrawal, we've all sort of used that. Cynicism, which is an interesting word in itself, but somebody who's using cynicism in the way they interact with people. Could be somebody who's just kind of hit that edge where they're beginning to burn out, they're hitting that. Lack of focus can sometimes be a symptom of burnout. Irritability, we're never irritable, are we? Loss of creativity, here's a good one. Quiet quitting, we've heard that term a lot lately, is that idea of quiet quitting. And then people who feel stuck or they feel in a rut.
And
So
I would add, if I were to go either deeper or add to that exhaustion, and I don't know why I keep focusing on that, but I think you said emotional exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I could just as easily put in there mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. It could be maybe spiritual exhaustion, but I think it could affect different areas of our life and probably all come out emotionally. But I think sometimes it literally is a physical thing, or people feel it as a physical thing, experience a mental thing. And that's why sometimes it could be hard for other people to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because some of those are hidden in a sense until you completely let them out. But, we often say we're sick, or, we're not able to move literally through this earth the way we used to. And I'm wondering if that might be an indication of a physical manifestation of I'm actually exhausted, I am burned out, versus a literal physical thing.
That's a really good point in terms of not other people not knowing what it is. So the way other people see you will be impacted by your burnout in different ways, depending on how you're reacting to it. So if your reaction is to show cynicism, or your reaction is to be snappy, or your reaction is to be disengaged, other people around you are making up stories about what's wrong with you because they're sensing something, but they may not be able to know what it is. I was just looking up the word cynicism because I think that's an interesting word to use here. So I was just curious, like, what is the actual definition of cynicism? And it's an attitude characterized by a deep distrust of others' motives, often assuming that people are fundamentally selfish, insincere, or driven purely by self-interest.
It's an attitude.
It is. And think about moving through life that way, where you're distrusting others' motives and you're already exhausted anyway. This just keeps feeling so physical to me in a way that would be hard to define. It's like tired to your bone, like in your bones tired. That's kind of what Andrea said, isn't it? Like, was that she used exhausted?
Every task feels 10 times harder.
Yeah.
That was a really strong statement, I thought, when she said that. And then the disengagement and then the persistent emotional state are the three things that she mentioned when she talked about it.
Yeah, it's trying to like conceptualize or even say out loud what that kind of exhaustion even feels like. I think that's hard to describe. I mean, these are beautiful ways to talk about it, but it's still you're feeling something that's really hard to explain to somebody else, because it would be easy, especially in our culture, for somebody to go, well, just get some rest, just take a day off, just take a day off, go on vacation, take a nap, like that seems like the advice people would say in response to that, where it would be difficult to really describe what that experience is like so they could understand it and empathize with it.
Yeah.
And a theme that I'm hearing over and over in just this short time we've talked about it, and it might be something we talk about during our third session, is while one person is experiencing and going through the burnout, others are impacted by the burnout.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's while we think of burnout as being a very personal thing, it's actually sending out so many other vibes, or the new word of the year, sending out so many other vibes to other people who are experiencing our burnout, but they may not call it that. They may call it something a whole lot worse because they don't truly understand.
Or they may misinterpret what they're seeing from someone as being someone who doesn't care.
Right. Doesn't want to get along, doesn't want to do the job.
Or somebody who's mean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or it's a performance issue, like their performance is going down and then they need to give feedback get feedback that their performance is dropping, when in fact that might be true, right, but it might not be why, right? Like it's not curious about what might be going on. I just have a quick personal story about this. I wasn't sure this was burnout, but when I heard you, Andy, really talk about that definition, I was like, nope, the criteria absolutely met this. Several years ago, I was in a role that I was burned out. And I felt a lot of what we're talking about here. But the day that I knew that it wasn't isolated to me, it was a 3-day weekend. And typically when you're burned out or when you're experiencing something, a weekend is not enough because you're coming down on Saturday and you're ramping back up on Sunday. So you don't have a break. There's no like capturing anything. And so this happened to be a 3-day weekend. And it was the second day of the weekend, and I knew I didn't have to go back to work the next day. So I had a free day where I was feeling pretty normal again. And we were in the car, and my husband looked at me and he goes, I have not seen you smile in months. And that was the moment. So that's interesting as we think about how are other people experiencing you. He probably hadn't even put together that he hadn't seen me smile until he saw me smile. And I wasn't receiving that kind of feedback from anyone, but I could feel it in that moment. And I had small children at the time. And so all of this bleeds over into the human being that we want to be. I mean, the implications are great as we think about, as we're having this conversation, I realize how massive the implications are to what we're depriving our communities, our faith communities, our volunteer experiences, our families, our own personal hobbies and things that we find joy in. There's pretty big ripple impacts of burnout.
Yeah. Here's some more things from some of the interviews that I did, which I think are interesting. It's just more words to add on to what people are feeling, what people see. When I talked to my wife, Nancy, who was an executive search consultant for many years, who had experienced some burnout in that role, she said it was like spinning your wheels. We've heard that metaphor used many, many times. I'm spinning my wheels. That I'm in a rut, that I lack momentum, that I feel trapped. And you start to think about it. I think one of the questions that I asked her is, when you are in that rut or you're spinning your wheels, do you feel like you're moving forward? And she goes, no. She said, I might be actually doing stuff, but I'm not necessarily moving forward. And so we kind of peeled that back a little bit. What is that about? Well, because what I care about or what my purpose is not necessarily aligned with the work that I'm doing. So I'm just spinning my wheels on the work that I'm doing, and I don't feel like I'm making any headway. And I've heard that theme from other people that I've talked to, that it is almost like you feel trapped. I think about a hamster on a wheel or something like that, which feels really frantic. And I'm not sure that people who have burnout always feel that sense of being frantic, but they oftentimes feel that sense of lack of purpose or lack of alignment with purpose. When Daniel Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, um, there's some alignment here when you start to think, well, what happens if there's not a strong sense of purpose? Well, then you're not engaged, you're not as motivated to um, perform at a high level because you're not tied to a higher purpose. What if you don't have as much autonomy? Then you feel somewhat helpless or trapped because you're not really calling the shots or you're not making the decisions or whatever to move things forward. And so it's interesting to see how some of these things tie in. I had one other person talk about that it felt like hitting a wall. And we've heard that metaphor before. I feel like I'm hitting a wall. What happens when you hit a wall? You stop or you feel some type of impact, right? She experienced repeated negative feedback in this thing, depleted sense of value, and in a cutthroat type of environment. And at a point, had kind of a turning point where she said, I have more value than this. This isn't where I belong. And that was kind of a turning point or a recognition that, oh, this is what's going on, and this isn't where I belong anymore. And I wonder how many people who experience senses of burnout experience that, because I know Nancy experienced that too, that this isn't where I belong anymore.
And I think in listening to you describe those interviews, and I think we maybe have even done it today, is when someone uses that big broad phrase of, oh, I'm burned out or I'm feeling burned out. From a coach's standpoint, I always think, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Describe what that means to you, because I think that starts to help open up what it really is. And it could be burnout, but not everybody experiences burnout the same way. So it's sometimes very interesting to have them, if you could describe the burnout, what does that feel like or look like for you? Like you said, it's the hitting of the wall. That could go down a whole road of what does that mean? Or I feel like a hamster on a wheel. Or I feel, you said another one.
In a rut.
In a rut. Yeah, spinning my wheels, but not, going anywhere. And so I think sometimes it is helpful to, even as you break down, we have kind of some of these definitions, these kind of more real definitions of burnout. But then as we use them or hear people use them, I think it's key to almost ask them to describe it a little more, or, what does it look like, feel like, sound like, is what a question I always ask. What does it look like, feel like, sound like when you say burnout? What does that mean? Because I think the more you dissect what those metaphors are, because you tend to always get some type of a metaphor.
Yeah.
Or possibly an analogy, but a metaphor. And then, doing that deeper dive on what does that mean? Because that's where you can get, for some people, to get into more of that, I feel completely disconnected. Or because I don't think people always associate burnout with lack of purpose, not off the bat.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like exploring the meaning is really important, because it might be burnout, but when we look at the definition, it's a pretty specific definition, and the experience of exhaustion and some of these other things can come from something other than burnout. I just read something recently that said it's easier to say I'm burned out than to say I'm lonely, I'm grieving, I no longer believe in what I'm doing, I'm exhausted from carrying the responsibility from everyone else, I don't feel safe enough to stop performing, or I don't know who I am anymore. Those are bigger questions, and it's just easier to encompass everything that we feel that feels exhausting and overwhelming as burnout. And I think it's important to make those distinctions, because if you're burned out, it's different than grieving. If you're grieving, there's a different way you might respond. I think a lot of times what you find are people who are burned out, once they get to that point, Andy, that you described, where they're like, I no longer belong here. The only option is to leave. And what I've been hearing is it's not just leave the organization. Sometimes it's I've got to leave the industry. I can't be anywhere near this. So I can't
Right.
imagine if I'm not an actuary, or I'm not a doctor, or I'm not a nurse anymore. I've got to go like be an accountant, or I need to go
Yeah.
do something else. I hear some people in my family joke, I'm going to go be a Walmart greeter. Like, I'm going to leave this job that I am doing and go to Walmart and say hello to people every day. Um, but I do think it is important to pull apart what it is, because it might not be burnout. It might absolutely be burnout, but the approach to healing from burnout or recovering from burnout would be different than if you're in a life transition, or you're experiencing grief, or you have a lot going on in your world, and there's identity shifts and transitions going on that you need to work through. So it feels important to think about what those other things might be, so that you can take the right approach and
Mm.
not overreact to something that it might not be, or make a decision that you might regret when it might not have been the experience that you were having.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know, I'm curious of what either of you will say on this. Do you see in making some of those distinctions, because I do think the distinction is important, do you see any overlap between some of those other feelings of like the grief, loss, overlap with burnout? And maybe that's where some of I mean, I guess I'm almost saying I do see that overlap, but I'm curious, do you see that overlap? And
I think we could
I think
get overwhelmed with that. I
yes.
think we can get, if we go back to Christina Maslach's emotional exhaustion is one of the elements of burnout, right? And I
Mhm.
think we can feel that emotional exhaustion through some of those other things you mentioned, Phyllis.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and human beings are complex, and several things can coexist. So I think, Phyllis, to your point, I do think there's a lot of overlap. There could be, um, as somebody who's going through an empty nesting process right now, there are significant periods of transition and identity shifts, and things that are simultaneous with losing a pet recently. So there's some loss and grief around that. So I think human beings are complex, and we can experience multiple things at the same time. And to not jump to burnout might buy you a little bit of time to ask yourself, what kind of exhaustion am I feeling? What's the nature or texture of this exhaustion? And then find the right way to either, burnout, rejuvenating and taking a vacation is probably not enough. But if you're exhausted, maybe taking a vacation is enough. Like, just like simply, I've been working long hours and I'm really tired. A vacation might be exactly what you need. But if you're truly burned out, a vacation's probably not the answer.
And like again with if you're in grief, um, maybe some time off will help, but then there might be opportunities for counseling or things along that line. So just
Right.
going into that deeper dive uh, of the metaphor of whatever somebody calls burnout, I think it helps you make distinctions. And then if it is burnout, you can go down that route a little bit more, explore it a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well, and I think some more texture to this, Phyllis. I work a lot with folks who work in EMS, healthcare, law enforcement, fire medics, who are constantly exposed to life and death situations and trauma. And trauma plays another role in all of this. And I have seen some people who handle that trauma really well, who have really healthy coping mechanisms, support systems. They work through that trauma and it doesn't cause burnout. But I've seen other folks where over time it just accumulates and gets sort of compacted like a trash compactor, and then leads to burnout. So it, you know, I think there is multiple textures here in terms of repeated moral injury or trauma in certain professions that people experience that contribute to this texture that you're talking about in terms of burnout.
Let me ask a couple questions as we start to close this episode out, because we're going to have two more episodes that go deeper into this topic, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. What do people misunderstand about burnout?
I'm not sure if this answers the question, but I would take a stab at this. If you are burned out and you notice it, taking time off to understand the texture of the experience and the exhaustion that you're feeling takes courage. And I think we have so many shoulds and so many labels. If I take time off, then I'll be lazy, or I'm shirking my responsibility, or people who are depending on me are not going to trust me anymore. There's all these shoulds and expectations that prevent us from actually addressing the experience. And I think what people get wrong is that taking time, giving yourself grace, even offering grace to other people isn't about being lazy or selfish. It's an act of courage.
Yeah. Another word for that courage, I love the word courage, but self-care is an element here, right? That need, as you begin to sense that you're moving toward burnout, or you're in burnout, or whatever, that whole idea of self-care, what does that look like? To If I'm the person that everybody else is counting on, and I'm carrying these big loads for people, and I don't feel like I can stop, I'm in on a hamster wheel or in a rut or whatever. I don't feel like I could stop. What does it look like to focus down and carve some time out for self-care?
Yeah.
To understand my purpose, what I care about, what matters, what really matters, and how do I align the work that I do with that? And some of that's just kind of a psychological shift over, I do this to support this.
Well,
Teresa?
and I'm sorry, I was just thinking about a client that we've worked with collectively, who I worked with one of their staff members individually, who literally said to me, if I am not available 24 hours a day, this system could completely fail and everything around it collapses. And if that's true, part of the work is that true? Or is it a story you're telling yourself? And if it is true, that is a system failure. There should not be one human being who is responsible for the collapse of an entire system. That's a lot of responsibility, and it's completely unfair. And I think, to your point, Andy, it's like we tell ourselves these stories, or we tell ourselves that taking care of myself or saying no or setting a boundary is somehow selfish, when in fact it's kind of dangerous. I mean, if there is an entire system depending on you, what if you like
get hit by a bus?
Exactly.
The proverbial beer truck, right?
The proverbial
or win the lottery. That's
or win the lottery.
There's also, and we're going to talk about this our next time around, is like system failures, and how do you lead through and make resilient organizations so that your people don't burn out. But anyway, it just reminded me of that story. And I was like, what are you saying? Like, this entire system rests on your shoulders? Because that doesn't seem healthy if it's true, but it certainly was a story they were not willing to entertain, was not true. And I don't know,
I think another misconception is that we think it is a personal failure. And I think I've even heard you, Teresa. So I'm going to steal this from you, who I think you stole it from someone else. I can't remember. that it's not a
Borrowed,
that
used
yeah.
strategically.
So
I don't
maybe
know.
I thought about it from the very beginning. I'm not sure. But that burnout is not a personal or a moral failure. And I think sometimes when we're in it, we think it's just a I can't do this. Why is this happening to me? When in reality, again, burnout could be it's definitely related to you, but why? And it's not just that I couldn't keep up or things along that end. It's there could be some systemic things at play. There could be some misinterpretations. There could be, like I said, almost courage to recognize you are in a burnout, but there's a way out or there's a way forward. But to kind of take it, we may take burnout as like a personal failure that I failed because I wasn't able to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are a couple things that you want to leave with our listening audience today from this first episode that they can kind of grab onto?
I think normalizing an experience of exhaustion is helpful. I think post COVID, the world is different. And I don't know how to describe it, but I can tell you the themes that come into my individual coaching conversations on a daily basis surround overwhelm and exhaustion almost without fail. And it's at a level that I didn't experience pre-COVID as much. It's different. The texture of it is different now. I don't know what all of that is or what that means, but I think it's fair to say to people, to your point, Phyllis, it's not a moral failing. It makes you a human being. And it makes you a human being in a world where many other people are experiencing this. And we live in a world of social media where I look at things and everybody's doing amazing and their families are perfect and, the pictures are perfect and they're going on vacation and everything is perfect because that's what they're putting out into the world. And now we're comparing ourselves against these perfect images. And then it just sort of adds to that sense of I'm failing. And I'm offering that in the conversations that we have every day with individuals, leaders, people in positions of authority in organizations and systems, almost everyone is exhausted and overwhelmed to different extents, but this is a very normal experience and you are not the only one experiencing it. And I think there is hope available. And we're going to talk about that, I think, in our third session, where we're really going to get into strategies and tips and support systems and how do you navigate your way through it.
Phyllis, what would you like our listeners to remember here?
The one thing is, I think, as we've been talking, people are not alone when they are experiencing it. Let's say all of our clients, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, we are going to hear this in a given day or a given week of coaching that people will describe themselves as feeling in a state of burnout. So you're not alone. You're not the only one. And oftentimes, you're not the only one in that you're also playing up against a system of some sort, be it a organization, be it a family, be it in something personal. There's some kind of a system that's going on that I think is where we can find hope that we can probably address that system in some way or acknowledge the system in some way, make it less personal. So that's one thing, again, because we don't want people to feel in this state. We don't want them to feel in it definitely in a persistent state because, that could go bad real fast. But just to know that you're not alone, you're probably not alone in it. And there are others who can help you or people who can help you. And how you'll just need to have the courage. That's probably more the thing that we'll need is the courage to address what we're experiencing.
Right.
How about you?
I want people to remember that burnout often happens to people who are heavily or highly dependent on by other people. that they're carrying a lot in that. And burnout also looks like spinning your wheels, lack of focus or purpose, hitting the wall, heaviness, where your work becomes, as Andrea said, feels like it's 10 times heavier or harder to do. So I think we've kind of put some nice words around the topic of burnout. Our next podcast will be on building resilient systems and organizations, what a leader's role is, and how you treat people in relationship to burnout. So what does the system look like? And how does that contribute not only to burnout, but to, in some cases, allowing people not to burn out? And then our third one will be tips and strategies and coaching strategies, and how do we support people who are experiencing burnout and how they can move forward. So thank you for your time today, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining us on Growth Beyond Boundaries. We hope today's episode gave you the inspiration and tools to push past limits and achieve meaningful growth. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us reach more people on their growth journeys. Remember, growth starts with one step, one conversation, and one decision to go beyond boundaries. Until next time, keep challenging the limits and discovering your potential. See you soon.